average email open rate right now is like 86% across my sequences. Write to an audience of one is my biggest piece of copywriting advice.
Brandon Jeffs is a TA leader who has spent a decade mastering the art of candidate relationships. With experience building teams at high-growth tech startups, his approach to recruiting breaks every conventional rule. When you say write to an audience of one,
when I'm writing to somebody, it's often like, all right, Chrome window 1 with my email, Chrome window 2 with their LinkedIn profile. And I like legit try to write in my own voice as if I'm like talking to them.
But in an industry racing towards automation, Brandon has discovered something counterintuitive about human connection.
It's crazy that I'm saying this as we go into 2025, but for me, what I'm seeing in real life is the biggest pattern disruptor is just by being authentic.
Do you have specific rules of where the candidate journey you present each one of those, or is it a mix?
It really depends. One of the things I've been doing is bringing a lot of the information asynchronously up front.
With recruiting tools becoming more sophisticated by the day, Brandon's insights challenge everything we think we know about candidate nurturing. What role do you see candidate nurturing playing in the future of work?
We don't have insight into the future, but I think this is one of those moments where we might be overshooting.
Thanks to Teamtailor for sponsoring this video. Hey, Brandon, I'm so excited to have you today on the show.
Hey, what's up, Rhona? I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Of course. So we're talking about a topic that I absolutely love, but I want to go back to your early days as a recruiter, right? What was your first aha moment that made you realize the importance of relationships with candidates?
Yeah, when I think back, so this is actually year 10 for me that I'm heading into recruiting. And in my 20s, I, like a lot of folks, took the advice and followed my passion. I thought I was going to work in restaurants and hotels. And what I found is I was doing management, doing a lot of hiring, training teams, and I really enjoyed that. So I segued to a corporate career in recruiting. And for me, my earliest TA role was very much community-based hiring. And what that meant for me in my role was I was hiring folks in the grocery industry. These are people that they didn't have digital profiles online. So I had to go boots on the ground, knock on doors. So to me, the early days was out of necessity. If I was going to be effective, it was all rooted in community building and handshakes in the most authentic and analog way, which is literally just by showing up.
Cool. Love it. So let's make sure we're all on the same page about what candidate nurturing means. So what does it mean to you to nurture a candidate?
For me, when I think about candidate nurturing, it's creating bespoke experiences for candidates that influence human behavior. If at the end of the day, a recruiter is trying to get to a handshake yes and an acceptance for a role, nurturing that relationship has to be aligned to that individual's motivations and their personality. So I try to bring my personality into the recruitment process. I work with early stage startups. So a lot of the stuff that I do doesn't scale. And that's why I enjoy it. And that's why I've gone super granular in my career as a recruiter. I'll always be a tactical recruiter. I think there's tremendous value from working requisitions. So when I think about what it actually means to me, it's really focused on what is driving that individual. And sometimes you can apply pattern matching, but for me, I like to stay humble and stay focused on the person that I'm in front of instead of thinking okay, I need 100 these types of folks.
Has that definition evolved for you over time?
Yeah, for sure. I, a couple years back, created a mission statement, and it's empowering the candidate-employer relationship in the future of work. And that's evolved now to the employee-employer relationship as I've moved into a people and talent role, building an entire people function. And when I think about that candidate nurturing piece, that's the how. How do I empower that employee or candidate relationship? And to me, it's all about those motions, that authenticity, being genuine, being transparent, and just being myself.
Love it. Love it. What advice would you give to recruiters who are overwhelmed, rightfully so, really, and feel like they don't have time to nurture candidates?
Recruiting is a high velocity function. It's one of the reasons I love it. And there's probably a heated debate about is recruiting sales or not. And I think folks can go back and forth on this. There are a lot of similarities, but fundamentally, the daily motions are very similar. And it's that high sense of urgency, velocity, get stuff done. So, my biggest piece of advice for any recruiter out there, or even a sales rep who doesn't think they have enough time to nurture something, is to slow down and to pause, think a little bit more strategically about how they can deliver more value in the connection for their prospect. So, tactical advice: work in sprints, time box yourself. We tend to overestimate what we can get done in a day and underestimate what we can get done in a year. I don't know who said that, but it's one of those like tech bro mantras that has stayed with me. So time box yourself, be like a master of your own domain. We often have more time than we think we do. And you can find 15 minutes anywhere in your day. I think if you can break your work chunks down into something that's digestible that you can sprint at a high velocity in. You don't have to do like an 8 or 10 like full day high velocity, but if you can find like little blips of 2, 3x productivity, that's where you'll see those impacts in your work and the results when it comes to placing candidates. Another piece of advice I have is super quickly that when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. A mentor once told me this, and it reframed how I was taking meetings, reaching out to candidates. And from a recruiting perspective, that really optimized my output at the top of the funnel.
So, as someone who comes from the tech world, I'm a former software engineer and project manager. I understand and 100% fully believe in the working in sprints and time boxing. But for folks who are listening who maybe aren't that familiar with it, can you give an example of kind of like what does working in a sprint mean to you? How does that look?
Yeah, totally. I think for me, from a daily perspective, it could be all right, morning coffee. I'm going to do 2 hours of sourcing. Then I'm going to have my blocks of candidate screens throughout the day. And then I'm going to have an afternoon session of ATS candidate communication cleanup and scheduling. So knowing what I'm doing each day helps remove the cognitive lift of thinking about what I'm going to do. And then from a requisition level, I always reverse engineer everything when I'm raising a rec. How long is it going to take us to fill this position on average? What does the data say? Can we beat that? Do we need to beat that? What are the drivers? And then backdating through that life cycle of the requisition from the estimated time in seat date to have those milestones and communicating them to a hiring manager. So from a like sourcing and recruiting workflow perspective, I think about it in like 2-week sprints for a live rec. If I get a rec that launches today, I can build pipe and present X amount of candidates by this time. That means the hiring manager will be having first round screens this time. Here's our estimated pass through rates. That means in wave one, we're going to have X amount of candidates. And while you're screening in week two, hiring manager, I'm sourcing cohort number 2 of candidates to present to you based on the feedback you fine tune in week 2. And then from there, it's reverse engineering the pipeline for those outreach demographics to understand, okay, how much output do I need to put into sourcing in order to get the results I'm looking for? If you were to do all of this as an exercise, I'm not a math person. I learned this on the job. The estimates I could come up with are probably not going to have too far off a degree of variance from what the data will tell you. And good recruiters taught me this.
So, let's say where people are sold on it, right? They only have about 15 minutes a day to dedicate to nurturing. What would you say is the main thing they should focus on?
If someone had 15 minutes a day, the number one priority would be to map the candidate journey, leveraging the types of tools that you have in your stack, identifying the touch points, looking at the candidate experience as if they were a customer, and how are you going to influence the behaviors at each stage. I think in 15 minutes, you can create a communication map with automation for the touch points, the emails, the calls that you need to communicate with the candidate in order to get to a yes. So if you had 15 minutes, I would do that.
So, something like, okay, I have 15 minutes. obviously the first time you set everything up, it's going to be more than 15 minutes. But okay, now I'm maintaining the thing that I've set up, the workflow that I've set up. I have 15 minutes. Today, I'm going to focus on the people that are in the, I don't know, hiring manager stage. That's where I have one touch point to them. Is that kind of like what you mean? Take it.
Yeah, 100%. And optimizing that yield ratio at the top of the funnel. So this means being more precise as sourcing recruiters and recruiters and talent partners when we're working with the hiring manager. Set ambitious goals for yourself. And instead of like a 45% pass through rate, make it a 60 to 75% pass through rate for yourself and the hiring manager. So if you break down 15 minutes a day, that means maybe instead of 10 screens as a recruiter, maybe you book 6 because you know those 6 are going to be super high quality. And then if you spend 2 minutes per those 6 doing deeper research on that individual, when you go into the meeting, you'll be able to extract more motivation from them. You'll be able to build that bond with the candidate and pick up on some of those post hire outcome qualities that you're looking to integrate into the recruitment workflow. So be more precise.
It's truly a mindset shift, I think, and I don't know if you agree, from what we're mostly thought to do in recruiting, because it's always about more, more, more. You have to do more screens, more candidates, you have to talk to more people. But what I found, and it sounds like you too, it's like really, if you get more strategic, more precise, and you get better people, you actually speak to less, but do way better as far as results.
Oh, 100%. I mean, at the end of the day, recruiters from a first principles thinking are getting to a handshake. So when I approach a rec, it's like, how do I just do this efficiently and get to a yes and find the right people? I think a lot of us get to a point in our career too where we have a great candidate bench just in our network, but it goes back to those daily rhythms and always being on and always sourcing. There's also this idea of like the difference between pipelining and sourcing. It's just those daily rhythms that you get into as a habit. And for me, that's why recruiting is like a calling. I think all recruiters should be sourcing. And there are ways to build that community so that you can pluck folks and pick up on their motivations and their skill sets more than just like a resume submission through a rec. I think when we zoom out, often recruiting is time boxed into 30, 45, 60 days time to fill. But the hardest factor to influence in recruiting is time. So you might have somebody that you've connected with, and 6 months later, they're a perfect fit. Or maybe there's headcount you can bring forward because you picked up on a great candidate in the market who's looking then. So that's how I think about it.
Recruiting is all about relationships, and Teamtailor gets it. Trusted by over 10,000 businesses and 150,000 recruiters worldwide, Teamtailor's all-in-one applicant tracking system features Nurture, a powerful tool that transforms your existing talent pipeline into active applications that fill your jobs fast. Create targeted email campaigns that engage passive candidates over time with perfect timing for each segment of your talent pool. And it's Teamtailor, so of course it's easy to implement. It's a smooth experience for you and your candidates. Want to see how automated nurturing can transform your talent pipeline? Use the link in the show notes to see why over 10,000 businesses trust Teamtailor to build better candidate relationships. What's your take on how the ideal frequency of staying in contact with passive candidates?
There's no one size fits all solution, and passive candidates can be defined very loosely. I would like to think that like my entire network of folks, and then if my network has a connection to your network, that's an extension. Now we're talking about like algorithmic reach, especially when we're using tools like LinkedIn. For example, I've had the privilege to work with some really amazing like exited startup founders and startup like early startup hires that I just stay in touch with. And there's this one guy in particular, he and I just vibe. And like I'm not working a rec that has anything to do with his background, and I haven't in months. But I know that just the way this person shows up online is really authentic, and it allows me to connect with that person. So if I have a role that comes across the desk, like of course he's on the short list. So that's how I think about frequency is fine tuning my algorithm, having the most interesting high leverage candidates in my network surfaced early and often so that I can chime in and showcase my personality. I can be a little bit out there sometimes, especially on LinkedIn, but I find it really helps being memorable to folks, especially if they are like an executive and I know it's going to be a tough search. Like if I can just represent myself better and more authentic, then maybe I'll be memorable to a candidate when the time comes for me to actually approach them with a job that I think might be aligned with their motivations and skills.
Doesn't it happen to you that because you keep top of mind for people, they sometimes come to you or bring you people?
This is most prevalent in the recruiter for recruiter space. I kind of have a policy where it's like, if a rec hits my algorithm, my news feed, or somebody approaches me with a rec and it's like, I know somebody that'd be perfect for it, like, I'm not going to try and chase some arbitrary bill rate and chase a buck. I am far more interested in the long term investment of that relationship. And that's how I try to differentiate myself. Like, I've gone out on my own in the past. I work in house now. So now I'm like, I just punt things to recruiters in my network that might be looking. But the recruiter for recruiter example is one that is an interesting light switch moment for me because there was a time where I was like, oh, I want to be an R for R recruiter. This sounds awesome. I love recruiting other recruiters. But now it's like, I just want to be friends with all the recruiters that are doing stuff in our space. And the best way I know how to do that is by demonstrating value. So I do that in a few different ways, but also like candidate trading. I mean, if a recruiter tosses me a candidate, I'm going to pay it forward, either back to that person or to the next one.
I love that. It's really I the reason why I love recruiting is because of all the relationships, and there's the relationships with candidates, with hiring managers, with other recruiters. It's just really truly a people business. So I want to chat a bit about your newsletter for candidates. I've heard that you are really good at this. What sparked the idea of having a newsletter for candidates?
So this is really interesting. And this is not the first time it's happened. I'm not the sole operator. I'm not the founder of TLDR. This is probably the third or fourth time where I've worked at an early stage company directly with the founder, where maybe it's just the way I show up online that people have thought it's me, which is really humbling. I mean, I wish I had founder equity. But when it comes to the newsletter you're talking about, so I work for a company called TLDR. It's tldr.tech. We are one of the largest newsletters in the world. We cater to a highly technical audience. Most of our subscribers, we have 5 million of them, are software engineers. And so when it comes to the content that TLDR curates, it's actually a collective of newsletters. So we are not a publisher in the traditional sense. We're not journalism. It's like news from people in tech for people in tech. And what that allows is knowledge sharing and a great source of truth and an email that somebody can open knowing they're going to get exceptional value for what's going on in the world of tech from other folks that are founders, engineers, R&D developers, like true researchers that have, published or founded companies on the backbone of this. And then on the reverse side of it, that means we have first party data on 5 million of the best engineers in the world. So when it comes to building our own team and growing as we scale, we're bootstrapped, we're profitable, we're flywheeling revenue. We're going to 3x revenue this year. It's crazy. The founder, Dan Nee, has a fascinating story, but it's all rooted in internet culture. And I think it goes back to how we connect with candidates in an authentic way that just focuses on delivering value to them.
So when you yourself have had to hire engineers for your company, have you leveraged those connections and those subscribers that you have for your newsletters?
We run a very, very lean team. I think Jason Lemkin would be shook if he knew our revenue per employee. So the shortest way to answer that is yes.
So maybe not that formal newsletter, but have you ever used, I know lots of tools out there have ways of creating different types of email campaigns and drip campaigns for candidates. Have you leveraged those?
Yeah, 100%. So I'm a newsletter email diehard. I actually started my career as a journalism intern, like as an editorial intern. I was working on a newsroom, publishing a blog, OG WordPress. And one thing that's been fascinating over time for both B2B and consumer brands is email is incredibly valuable. That's why every time you log on to a consumer website, they want to give you 10% off their average basket size in exchange for your email address. It's always worth it to them. During the 2010s, we got super excited about the capabilities of social media for driving revenue. But at the end of the day, email has come out on top. So as a recruiter, I remember specifically back in 2018 using Smart Recruiter's newsletter. I had a fantastic director of recruiting, Beth Wolf. Shout out to Beth Wolf. I would not be here without you, Beth. And she gave me like full keys to the kingdom to run like a nurture campaign from one of those like talent community requisition openings. And Smart Recruiters had a drag and drop email template builder, which was awesome. So each month we'd put out like a little hiring newsletter, and it was really scrappy. And I was like building stuff in Canva. We would do open houses at the office. So that's how it started. It evolves. I actually have been a marketer as well. I ran a customer loyalty program to an audience of 1.3 million shoppers for a publicly traded grocery store. And I think that really honed my email skills and diving into more of that like A/B testing and then using enterprise software tools for managing those types of email programs at volume. So I've always been huge on email itself. And the time came to that I approached Dan at TLDR and hit him up with a cold email. I said like, hey, this sounds cool. And we started jamming, and the rest is history. Here we are.
What's been your like biggest learning about what really makes candidates actually open emails?
Write to an audience of one is my biggest piece of copywriting advice. But if you're specifically asking about how to open an email, I think like my average email open rate right now is like 86% across my
Wow.
sequences. It's keeping it simple. 5 years ago, I would have told you put an emoji in the subject line. And that like spiked open rates in the 20s for a consumer brand. So I think like being able to test things and being curious, but write to an audience of one and keep it super simple. Like if I'm inboxing a prospective candidate about a job, I like literally just say like the job. Like people can't not open it.
That's amazing. When you say write to an audience of one, I believe I understand what you're saying, but I want to make sure everyone listening does. So does that mean just like think of one person and write to them?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to this idea that a lot of lifestyle brands do around developing a persona. So when I'm writing to somebody, it's often like, all right, Chrome window one with my email, Chrome window two with their LinkedIn profile. And I like legit try to write in my own voice as if I'm like talking to them. And like sometimes that's like, hey, what's up? Or yo, or like any type of vernacular I use in my speech. When it comes to email and any type of copywriting right now, what we're seeing is that we're all inundated with words on a screen. It's just a varying screen size. We go from iPhone to laptop to television, back to our iPhone to iPad to Kindle. Like that's my day. It's so sad. So when it comes to the content, it's about pattern disruption. And it's crazy that I'm saying this as we go into 2025. But for me, what I'm seeing in real life is the biggest pattern disruptor is just by being authentic and communicating with people through those devices the same way I would on the street in a verbal conversation.
How do you take that philosophy of audience of one when you're not necessarily writing to one person, right? You're not okay, you don't have their LinkedIn profile. This is your nurture campaign. You for whatever reason they're in your pipeline and you're nurturing them, sending them a hey, what's up type of email. How do you take that philosophy and put it in that?
There's probably a lot of folks out there that are mastering the newsletter space that have these amazing personal brands. So I try to just see what other people are doing and mirror it. That's my biggest piece of advice there. I subscribe to a lot of newsletters, stopped opening a lot of them just because I run out of time. But there are a few that I open pretty much every time. And some of that comes down to personal connection with the author. So I know that like when I read them, I'm hearing their voice. Or it's somebody who is like an online creator. And because they're taking a multimedia approach, they're able to bridge that gap of proximity and relationship building because you might be watching them on a TikTok and then you might see a YouTube video. You might hear them on a podcast. And the next thing you know, that you're in their inbox and you're able to bridge that vulnerability, that connection, that intimacy. I think that's what great brand builders are doing right now.
And on a tactical level, does this mean that when you send these campaign emails, you send them directly from your email, not like a generic recruiting at TLDR?
Yes. So my nurture campaigns right now are like my playbook for the last 4 years has been typically a 3 sequence drip on a 7-day cadence. And emails 2 and 3 are like, hey, did you get this? And email 3 is like, interested. So keeping it super small. That to me yields the best results. That's something that doesn't scale. I know when you're thinking about like creating these types of nurture campaigns at an enterprise software company, there's just too much paper pushing and policy and procedure and approvals and standardization in order to optimize for like basis point yields from the bottom line that you can't do that kind of thing. I've also sent like on behalf of messages before if I'm working with a founder and I'm outreaching software engineers. Sometimes there's a little bit more equity coming from the founder and like pretending to be the founder. That's just like
Yeah.
the way it is now. And I think some candidates know and some candidates don't know that. But ultimately, it's hard to prove. And ultimately, if it's a great email and a strong value proposition, it's low risk for the candidate. But I always leaned out from OBO type of sequences just because I want to present as myself and I don't want to have that cognitive load later of like, oh, wait, is this person I'm talking to from my sequence or the founder's sequence? So I don't like to backtrack often. So it really comes down to just finding my voice, finding a playbook that works, A/B testing the copy, A/B testing the subject lines. But we talked about subject lines earlier and that seems to be working. So for me, it's all about like getting to that 40-50% reply rate.
And we've talked about, you've mentioned A/B testing and experiments and things like that. Is there any experiment that you've run that like totally flopped?
Oh, this is a good one. I'm a terrible copy editor. This goes back to my days in the newsroom. I remember I published an article once and I was covering an Olympic figure skating event and I like listed the wrong gold, like the wrong color medal that a certain athlete had received. And I learned then at like 21 years old, like the process for correcting that in a newsroom. So that's probably like my biggest mistake, like publishing in a newspaper for like a Hearst newspaper, the wrong information. So fact checking. But when I think about it from a recruiting lens, the only thing that has been a flop is over indexing on it to deliver results. Newsletter, nurture campaigns, email campaigns to your database of folks in your recs should be one arrow in the quiver. I think when it comes to outreaching candidates, particularly in early stage startups, it's really focusing on getting net new into the pipeline. A lot of companies can be successful sourcing from their ATS at scale, particularly if they're leveraging evergreen recs and they have an incredible brand. But for the work that I'm doing on a daily basis, it's net new.
I always like to ask about like big flops and things like that in people's careers. And I didn't actually remember this one when I was planning this episode, but as you were talking, and it has nothing to do with having the wrong metal color, but I remembered I was testing something out with a nurture with a drip campaign, and I chose the wrong template for I had segmented into like my top people that I wanted to come to about the role. I sent the template for rejection emails to the people I was
Oh,
trying
yeah, 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 for sure.
to nurture. Oh my gosh, I still have
Yeah,
those.
if you haven't done that, like you're not a real recruiter. If you haven't accidentally told a candidate, like, okay, bye, I love you, you're not a real candidate recruiter. One of the things, actually, as you say that I think about that I messed up, this is actually a trick, and I was going to post about this, but it's like a fake mess up. Say I'm like sourcing an IC, and one thing that I'll do is I'll often throw a director or a VP or the people manager into that IC rec. Usually get like one of 3 responses. Response 1 is like, not looking, here's two or 3 candidates. Sweet, you just got pipe. Number 2 is sometimes like, I'm a manager. I'm not an IC. It's like this kind of how dare you tone. It's like, yeah, but you took time to like email me back. Okay, sweet. You're insecure. And I bet your team probably doesn't want to work for you. That gives signal to go source that person's team. And then third is they'll probably like email you back because you're in their ICP and they want to pitch slap and reverse sell you, which is totally fine because like in the exec search game, like it's a long play anyway. So like I'll take that call all day. It's always worth 20 minutes to be try to reverse sold by an executive that I'm always trying to grow my network with. So that's a fake flop to send a director your IC sequence.
Love it. Love that. How do you decide what type of content is worth sharing with your candidate pool?
There are three pieces of content that I think are worth sharing with the candidate pool when it comes to recruiting talent. One, the product story. Two, the growth story. Three, the financial story. Everything I send to the candidate needs to touch on one of those pieces in order to drive the conversion to a yes. It's just about where in that candidate journey we present that information.
Do you have specific rules of where the candidate journey you present each one of those, or is it a mix?
It really depends. Depends on the role, if it's technical or non-technical, depending on what the data says for yield ratios and conversion moments at which stages in the funnel. And it also just comes through doing the work and having these conversations and understanding if it's going to take like a sell call and a screen at the top of the funnel, or if I can cover a lot of this in a recruiter screen. One of the things I've been doing as I've taken on more strategic work is in my commitment to the tactical work and being a recruiting leader that works Recs as a senior IC, but also setting the strategy is bringing a lot of the information asynchronously up front. So after a candidate books that first screening call with me, if they're an outbound candidate, I have pretty much like a template that I'll send out with everything I need them to know and want them to know so that they don't have to spend 2 hours doing research. They've just got an email with like 3 or 4 pieces of breadcrumbs that tie back to that product growth and financial story.
I love that. And I bet you that makes for really rich and just meaningful conversations with them when it comes to like questions, because they're not asking like the surface level things, or like you said, spending all this time trying to research the company.
Yeah, and it's one thing that I see occasionally too, where somebody like comes to an interview and they're not prepared. This is usually more for inbound candidates, and I've hired some amazing inbound candidates who are prepared. So this is not a dig at inbound, but I'm surprised by a lot of candidates, particularly in go-to-market roles, that come to a recruiter screen and don't have this type of information and research done already, or they're asking questions about the job descriptions. Like I take a lot of pride in my job descriptions. Like I spend time writing them. So when they ask questions that are like in the job description, it's just like a dead giveaway that they're not aligned for the role. And like, we just wasted each other's time.
Yeah, I've done a lot of like startup recruiting as well, and it's a different game. You want the person to want to know about the company and research and things like that. So I totally get that. What's your tech stack for candidate nurturing?
When it comes to my tech stack for candidate nurturing, I've run a pretty lean stack. I've sandboxed a lot of AI tools in the last 18 months. ChatGPT week 1 user. So it's like I'm interested in it, but I'm not putting all of my like eggs in the AI LLM basket. I think it could be helpful, but one of the things that AI and LLMs are terrible at is personalized outreach. One of the things they are great at is research. So when I think about like the tech I'm using, it's pretty lean. It's like a couple of Chrome extensions. It's an applicant tracking system. I like a Kanban board style ATS so I can drag and drop, see visually, move fast. So when it comes to nurturing, it's using an email sequence directly from the ATS that's piped directly to the requisition and the job so that I always know like my current considerations for active pipeline and my prospects so I can run retargeting campaigns if that first sequence only yielded a 20% reply rate. And then in terms of tech stack, let's see, is there anything else I'm forgetting? I'm a Slack, Google Workspace, Notion guy. I've built ATSs in Notion, Airtable, and Zapier myself. In the past, Slack integrations are great for working with the hiring manager, especially when you're doing like at mentions in interview scorecards to get quick feedback. My favorite micro metric is time to completed scorecard. If a hiring manager completes a scorecard within like 2 hours of an interview, I know that candidate is like pretty legit. But if the hiring manager sits on it for a day or two, it's like, okay, we need to keep working here. They're not a fit. So that's pretty much my stack today. I love a cell phone. Man, I got my like dented iPhone 11. It's cracked. One of the things I've noticed is we schedule more video calls these days. And I've been leaning into this. I've started actually taking more video recruiter screen calls than old school phone calls. But I love jumping on the phone. I'll give everybody my phone number. I'll send you silly little TikTok style videos of me working remotely from my house, singing songs, being a goober.
Amazing. And you spoke a bit about automation with Zapier and things like that. Are there any other tools or like how do you use that to automate your drip campaigns?
Yeah. So in the applicant tracking system that I'm using, there is like an email sequence tool. So I'll build it out directly in the ATS. I know there's a lot of great applicant tracking systems out there that have evolved. I think about this as like the third wave of hiring. First, it was like paper resumes, scanning resumes. Then was like larger enterprise ATS systems that were not candidate focused. They weren't built with human centered design in mind. They were often HRIS companies that needed an ATS solution. But now we're in the third wave of hiring where it's human centered design, candidate experience first, heuristics, beautiful UX, beautiful UI, but it also takes into mind the recruiter experience. I've done things as petty as like matching up my tech stack by color. So there's a lot of great tools out there. I think if you go to a conference, particularly like an HR tech in Vegas, there's tremendous market parity when it comes to buying these tools. I want to support my friends. I want to use bleeding edge technology. But at the end of the day, like there's a lot of ways to get things done. I mentioned it earlier in our episode, like I have a passion for cooking. I actually hate fancy cooking equipment. Like give me like the gnarliest, like worst knife in the kitchen. I like a plastic handle knife. I like a plastic cutting board. I like an old pot that's been around for 20 years. It's about the end product that needs to be polished and beautiful and wonderful. So maybe that's how I think about my tech stack and why I like doing stuff with bubblegum and paper clips. But I'd be happy to dive deeper if you want to talk specific tools or give anybody a tutorial. Like if anybody wants to call me up and be like, yo, how do I use this Chrome extension? How do I run a bash script against a PDL's leak? Anything you want to know about getting candidate data and enriching emails and figuring out ways to connect with people is always a fun conversation.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of the people that listen to this podcast, I mean, kind of like why I named it "Throw Out the Playbook" and stuff like that. We don't. I always say budget is a trigger word for most people in TA because we hardly ever get any. So I know I am, and the listeners are usually people who are like you doing the most with the least and just using what you know works. I love your example about your knife and stuff like that. It was funny. I think I bought an actual set of knives like probably 8 or 9 years into my marriage. And it was because my cousin, who is a trained chef, was coming to visit for Christmas. And I'm like, maybe I shouldn't expect her to cook with my steak knives from Walmart that I used to cut.
I'm with you. Great to hear you have a passion for cooking too.
I'm the same way at work with stuff. It's just like, let's just use what been working, what works. It doesn't have to be the fanciest thing.
Oh, I've got a great example actually in my real work today. So leading people and talent at TLDR, like we're implementing Lattice actually. And I had built like a performance management and OKR framework in Notion. And I told the founder, like, yo, we could do this way, bootstrap it, make it work until like this milestone where I think we might want to invest in software. And then like I talked to the folks at Lattice and it's like literally $100 a year per employee. Like HR tech is so cheap. My recommendation is like, go talk to these folks, test tools, hit up the founders, figure out the differences, understand why something doesn't work. I think that's a big piece right now for like this second to third wave movement for recruiting tools, particularly in the candidate facing side of it from outreach and scheduling is like understanding why something doesn't work. If you're a recruiter and you're getting candidate drop off or low attendance rate, like, do you know the difference between an API call for a calendar versus a .ics file? So these questions around curiosity and understanding how our systems serve us is really what dictates the market, not the other way around. Like, don't roll up to HR tech and let some founder like tell you how to do something. Like, be confident, have conviction, test things. It's cheap enough to figure out solutions.
Have candidates ever given you any feedback on your nurturing process? Like, what have they appreciated the most about it?
This is something that I actually struggle with. I don't take positive feedback with a lot of absorption. It's nice when I get that message and in the moment I'll smile, but like it'll go in one ear and out the other so fast. I actually encourage any new recruiter to create a brag book like day one. Create a file, open it in your iPhone, just do something so that on those hard days where you're like, why the heck am I doing this? You can go back and pump yourself up. As a team, as a function of one, like I am my own pep rally. I am a little bit extra. I annoy myself most days, but being able to go back and think of those wins at a very granular level, if we're influencing one person in one of the most important decisions in their lives, which is where they're going to go to work, that's enough. So this is something I'm actually working on and would love to hear how you do it.
I love your advice because I wish I would have started a brag folder earlier on in my career. And I didn't. When I moved to recruiting, it was such a like literally pushed into it from what I was doing. It was so different from being a software engineer and all of that. And I started in leadership of recruiting because I was already in leadership. So it was hard. But yeah, that's what I do. I keep screenshots, anything anyone has said, because like you, I don't remember the good things, but one bad thing, one negative feedback, that I remember it detailed for the rest of my life. But the good things, I kind of like don't remember them. So I like to have that for those days when I get the negative feedback, because we all get it. I can open my brag folder and literally go through the screenshots and be like, I'm actually good at this. I remember.
It's really funny you say this, Rona, because this morning I saw this question. You teed this up in like the pre-show notes, and I saw it last night as I was going to bed. And there's actually a candidate that I remember speaking to a few months back, and he gave me like one of those notes that I remember made me feel really good. And then I was like, okay, what is his name? What is his name? And I was like racking my brain as I was falling asleep. And then sure enough, today, like I posted, and like I just saw it a few minutes ago before we recorded, that he liked one of my recent posts. And it's like I can remember a face, and I try to remember people's names because it's the most important thing about them. But like as a recruiter, we see so many names, but I can remember faces. And it's usually only like occasionally where I'll forget somebody's name or not actually be able to thread that needle from a memory perspective. But like because of this, because of you prompting this, I'm going to be able to go pinpoint that and find that person because I actually want to sell a role to them and re-engage them for an active rec I'm working right now. So thank you for making this like recruiting happenstance real time for me.
Amazing. I love that. As we wrap up, what role do you see like candidate nurturing playing in the future of work, like especially with remote and fractional and just where we live right now?
This is tough because we don't have insight in the future, but I think this is one of those moments where we might be overshooting the capabilities of AI. I think we're very much moving towards the dead internet, but we're not going to be there as quickly, I think, as people anticipated. So the short answer is what is the role it play? What is the role it plays? Same as it always was. And one of the things that sets people apart is adding value. Specifically, what do I mean by that? If I work in the exec search space, if I work in the sourcing recruiting space for early stage companies, I have learned that I always have to be pipelining. I can't just open a rec, optimize for application yield ratios and get a handshake. Yes. It's got to be part of my daily motion. And that's why I'm committed to recruiting. So, one of the ways you can do that is, particularly if you're reaching out to an engineering leader, demonstrate value to them. They're getting bombarded with tons of emails each day. Go back to that pattern disruption. Don't be precious about our candidates or introductions you can make. Put a little sauce on the plate. Leave people wanting more. When it comes to nurturing, it's leaning into the value that we can present for other folks. And maybe it's shipping a candidate or two. They'll remember you for being generous. There's also nothing wrong with a little quid pro quo when it comes to understanding more of those cold relationships and threading opportunities to add value. So that's kind of a seller tactic once you get into that call and have the introduction. If you need to leverage like quid pro quo, like I think it works in respectful ways. So ultimately, what it comes down to is recruiting is about influencing human behavior, driving connection with other people. If you don't want to do that, like there's a million other ways to make a living.
I love that. It's true. Anything about candidate nurturing that I didn't ask you that you think is important for listeners to know?
Yeah, like you can't spell nurture without you are. So I want to know what you are doing. I'm sorry to be a dork, but like how do you think about nurturing? Like it's so complex and I'm really appreciative of us diving in on this.
Great question. I think about it very similar to you. To me, it's all about the relationships and it's the long game. Just like the way I think about my content as a content creator, it's the same way I've thought about nurturing candidates. It's like you said, it's the people that you meet today that you just know, okay, I don't have something for them right now for whatever reason, but this person totally fits with either the company I'm working with or the types of companies I like to work with because I know what types of companies I usually work with. So just starting that relationship and again, giving value. There's been so many times where it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know. For whatever reason, people write to me when they've had a bad day at work. It's like, can you believe what my manager said? And not in a slimy, like, ooh, let me slide. Oh, yeah, it's a great time to like sweep them up from where they are at. But it's like, what did they say? Do you have 5 minutes? Let's talk about it. How are you going to reply to that email? Just basic, how I would help any of my friends. I do a lot of that. And that has really helped whenever I find a role for them. And it's like, hey, what about this? Even if they're happy at where they're at, because I've listened to them on those off days and because of the relationship that we've built through the years, they always take my calls. They always open my email. So it's very people first approach. And the reason why I do recruiting is because I love people.
100%. I agree with all of that. And that's what's cool about the tools right now being built and a lot of these like third wave of hiring vendors are focused on the recruiter experience. They want our feedback. Like Teamtailor does a great job at implementing product feedback in 6-week sprints. They're approachable. It's an elegant product. It looks cool. It's like bubblegum yum yum pink. So if you're talking about matching up your tech stack and maybe matching your microphone, like, it's cool to see their evolution as well. They're breaking into the North America market, the US market. They're wildly popular in Europe. And I know some folks over there and have worked with them. And it's just really cool to see that candidate nurturing component, how they're thinking about employer branding, the modules there. So we're on the precipice of some really cool emerging technology. And that's one of the benefits of startup technology and startup tech is like you get to sandbox things and try new tools in a way that enterprise solutions can't work as nimbly.
Yeah. Oh, and I could talk about Teamtailor for hours and hours, but truly, as someone that comes from a engineering background, I was very big on like user experience and user testing. And like you said, Teamtailor is really about the like recruiter experience and the nurture section and their connect section of their or features of their application are truly built with the recruiter in mind and the candidate in mind. And you can totally see it as with the ease of how you use it and just how easy it is for candidates and also for you. So yeah,
I love to
definitely.
see it. I think we're definitely going to be in a space where yes, there's continued market parity, but it really comes down to having the right tool for the job. And I've used a lot of different tools. I want to use a broad variety of them, and it's also like relatively inexpensive. So it's like go
Yes,
try
it
it, go
is.
sandbox it, go ask a vendor for a sandbox instance.
Yeah, you'll be surprised how many times you get that just by asking. So I have loved this conversation. How can listeners get in contact with you?
Yeah, my number is 720-646-9075. Shoot me a text, say what up. I'm for real. I love talking to folks. I will be speaking at TA Week in San Diego with some friends. Really excited to see the Teamtailor folks out there. We're gonna hang out and do some cool stuff around the employer brand and nurturing space. December 10th, I'll be at the Hire Easy for Recruiters by Recruiters conference, talking about recruiting in 2025 with clarity and confidence. Shout out to Hire Easy and the team, Shannon and Daniel. I run a podcast called the Rebel TA Podcast, where we talk with people and talent leaders in the future of work. My content is sometimes a little out there. It might not be for everybody. I'm kind of a goober, but engage with my contacts. Send me an email. I love a good email, love a good text. And then if you are looking for recruiting support, like happy to connect anybody to the right folks. I've been punting a lot of inbound leads that like my own content engine has developed. I run a little strategy firm that I put on hold while we build TLDR. So yeah, any way you want to get in touch, I'm always down to jam.
I love it. And I can't believe you gave your phone number. That's amazing. That's a first on this podcast. Amazing. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rhona. This has been awesome.
If you want more actionable advice, like the advice shared in this episode, I write a weekly newsletter for TA professionals who want to take a more strategic approach to recruiting. You can sign up at throwoutheplaybook.com/newsletter. That's throwoutheplaybook.com/newsletter. The link is in the show notes.